Microphone on. Hi guys, Sleepy Reader here. Damien. It's 0 month. It's week 1 of 0 month. 0.1. So it shows how many DC comics I really get. I think it's over half of the comics I read are DC comics. Maybe 16, 17 comics a month that I read are DC. Maybe even more with the trades I'm now picking up. So a lot of these 0 issues came to me naturally because they're on my pull list at my comic book store. And then I picked up one extra one. This is basically the first issue of the new DC's Phantom Stranger, because I think issue 1 comes out next month. And he's always been a slightly intriguing character. Dan DiDio is reputed to be a really bad writer, but I liked his OMAC, so I thought that would be worth a try, although he co-wrote that with Keith Geffen. So I grabbed that. A book that I regularly get but is not on my pull list is Stormwatch, and I postponed getting the Stormwatch 0 issue. So yeah, I'd say the 0 issues so far are turning out pretty much the way I expected, which is kind of a dud and kind of a distraction from good stuff that was going on. Yeah, just mostly a waste. So nothing horrible either. But if you don't have a pull list and you're not a completist, just don't pick up most of these issues. So before I go into a little more detail on that, I wanted to give a shout out. There's lots of new people coming on, wanting to be part of the community, and that's really great. And sometimes people get lost in the shuffle. It's weird. Some people get more views than I do, who've only been on for a few weeks, and other people, no one finds them for a really long time. So I wanted to give a shout out to 3 new guys that I've been watching. There's comicKkrakK, or comicKkrakK, named himself after the common sound effect in comics where they use a lot of Ks, and maybe a lot in Kirby comics, I think. Anyway, he's just started some good videos. You should check him out. And then there's tmcfarlanefan, who's also just started, and looks like he's going to be doing some good videos. And then last but not least, this time around, is Steve, ComicsSGW, over in England. And he's been doing videos for a few weeks now, I think, but very few people have discovered him. His most recent review was quite good. So anyway, check him out. So yeah, Phantom Stranger. Another thing that attracted me to this was artwork by Brent Anderson. And Brent Anderson's been around for a long while, kind of a guy who stays mostly in the background, I think, more often doing filler issues. I think he helped with some recent Action Comics art. To those of you who are into the slightly quirkier comics, you might know him from Astro City. I think he did all the interior art in Astro City, although the big star artist of Astro City was Alex Ross, who did all the covers and the costume designs. And I remember Brent Anderson doing occasional fill-ins on the X-Men back in the early 80s. And in the early 80s, I used to read his Kazar, which he used to do with Bruce Jones, I believe. For whatever reason, that was a series I liked a lot. And going back even further, when I was a kid and I first discovered comics, and I somehow got a hold of this newspaper called the Comics Buyer's Guide, which, along with old comics, also include people's ads for fanzines. I got a Ditto, one of those old blue purple Ditto or Mimeo, are they mimeographs? Ditto fanzines, which people had to do on stencils. And there was one of them had these elaborate, mostly wordless adventures of barbarians drawn by this guy named Brent Anderson. I couldn't believe how good they were, at least as a kid I couldn't. Drawn on these Ditto pages. And the only comic book convention I ever went to, I actually met Brent Anderson and mentioned that to him, and he seemed a little embarrassed. But and that was back in the 80s. But anyhow, so I always sort of notice when Brent Anderson is doing something. But the first thing I noticed was that this was pretty weak Brent Anderson work. Everything looks kind of stiff, and it could be partially the inker. But I felt like maybe this was a rush job for him. There was little elegance or anything. It was just kind of a workman-like comic book, nothing more, nothing less. So, what to say about this? Ghost Critic did a great analysis of this, and I even missed what biblical figure Phantom Stranger was, because I didn't have any memory of the 30 gold coins. And there was things in here that threw me off from figuring out who he was, such as I don't know. I thought that when we were looking at this, I thought this took place in more modern times, for instance, when he gets inducted by this mysterious... So he's dead, and instead of going to hell or whatever, he comes before this tribunal of magicians who turns him into the Phantom Stranger and condemns him to wander for all time. And then only in the modern period does he suddenly hear voices which tell him what to do, and he obeys the voices, which then causes someone to get killed, who then becomes another famous DC character, and supposedly that's part of his path of redemption, although he doesn't have to do anything. He just follows what the voices say, and what he didn't seem very redeeming. So I don't know. I still hold out hope that Phantom Stranger could be kind of cool, but as Ghost Critic said, it more likely will succeed if Dan DiDio is not the writer. It just seemed like the writing was really clunky, and missed making this very interesting at all. And given that this is an origin issue, it seemed to prefer to remain vague and insubstantial. I have no idea what I've read this, and I have no idea what the Phantom Stranger's mission is, except that he wants to be redeemed, and he does whatever some voice tells him to. I don't know what his powers are. I don't know. I guess he wants to be redeemed. Other than that, I don't know what his motivations are, his feelings. He feels bad. He feels numb, I guess. I mean, he's been wandering around kind of like a ghost for thousands of years, and so I don't know. So much could have been done with the raw material here, and it was not. If you're curious and you like #1 issues, it's not a horrible read, but you aren't missing a thing if you don't read it. Dial H. I've been following this series. I guess it's only up to about issue 4 or 5. I've been following this series despite myself. I know it's not that great, but it has a lot of good elements, and I'm still really curious to where it will go. And I kind of just love the person who turns into a new hero every issue, if not several new heroes every issue. And China Mieville, the writer, this is his first comic book series he's ever written, and I think he's still struggling with it. Maybe he'll get better. This issue had a guest artist, was quite good, and we go back in time, and instead of a regular dial, it's a sundial. I think No, I don't even know, because somehow this civilization is connected with the Romans, but it looks kind of Mayan or something to me, or some kind of, Central America, ancient Central America or something. But so I don't know where he intends this to take place. Maybe if I reread it, I would figure out. I'm going to be a bit spoilery here. She turns into, even though this I think is thousands of years in the past, she turns into Bumper Car Lady, or Bumper Carla, which is kind of clever but totally confusing. And we do learn something new about the dial H, which I hope he follows up with this in later issues, because it puts the whole thing into a different perspective. So I'm going to spoil it right here. You might want to skip a minute. It turns out that the powers from the dial are stolen from other universes where there are superheroes, and those superheroes briefly lose their power while you take on their power and their persona in our world when you dial H. So, and catastrophes can happen in those other worlds. There's still all kinds of unexplained stuff, so in the end, it's kind of fun. We see some other superheroes from this universe where powers were stolen. But how did they travel to our DC universe and track down the ancient whatever they are? Maybe they're some kind of ancient Turks or something. If there's some kind of dusky-skinned people who are not African, as far as I can tell. Anyway, they track them down and have some interaction with them that ends tragically. It's all, there's something weak going on here too. I'd say if you're following Dial H, this is worth reading. It's interesting enough, but for instance, the sundial breaks, but we never see it break. It's just referred to as being broken by a monster. We saw the monster, we saw the fight with the monster, we didn't see the sundial break. It's just those kind of details that all seem off. Things are not connecting well. I still have the running theory that the writer doesn't know how to work well with his artists yet. So I would give this issue a moderate thumbs up. It's worth reading if you're already into Dial H. It's not the best issue of Dial. It's not very enlightening, but it does give a few more clues. So things are getting a little better. Swamp Thing had great art, I thought, by Kano, and it is kind of mostly narrated by Arcane. Is that what he's called? Arcane, the avatar of the Rot. And we get kind of a view of the Rot here as generally the victorious side. Arcane is constantly defeating all the avatars of the other sides over and over again. Lots of beautiful art. It is creepy. It is a horror book. It definitely creeped me out in a couple of scenes. But in a way that, yes, a good creeping out. Not for children. Too disturbing. But we get Arcane seems victorious. And near the end of the book, we switch to the point of view of the Court of Trees, or whatever they're called, who are the elder statesmen of the Green. And they say it's too late to save Alec Holland, but then they say maybe there's a way. And so apparently there was a way, but it's not explained. And again, 0 issues, isn't that a place to explain things? So it ends, we see that in fact there was a way, but we don't know what the way was. How the whole issue convinces us that there isn't a way for Alec Holland to survive. And then the last page, he does. We all know he does, so I'm not really spoiling anything. We all know the Swamp Thing is ongoing. Now, I've only jumped back on the Swamp Thing since Rot World began. So I am going to catch up in trades, and I just got the first trade. And I'm looking forward to reading it. And maybe this 0 issue will mean a lot more to me once I've read the trade. I'm not sure. It felt like half a story, a good half a story. An interesting thing in my mind about Swamp Thing is it started out with Len Wein and Bernie Wrightston creating it, and I thought it was really cool back then, but it was kind of a science horror story. He was created by science, and science gone wrong, not really like Frankenstein, but in the vein of Frankenstein. A monster is created, and that's the basic core of it. And then Alan Moore and that was really good. And then Alan Moore kind of brilliantly turned it on its head and said, no, science didn't even create this Swamp Thing. And he said the Swamp Thing is not Alec Holland. It's just a plant creature who thinks he's Alec Holland. And then he developed the whole idea of the green and the court of trees, and the Swamp Thing is the avatar of the green, of kind of a nature god almost. And he explored that brilliantly. But when you turn your heroes into gods, there's only maybe so far you can go. So after Alan Moore, it never seemed to really go anywhere very much, or never seemed to grab me. And it was one of those comics that I felt it had been done, the best had been done by Alan Moore, and there really wasn't much point in doing Swamp Thing again, which is why I didn't really follow Scott Snyder's Swamp Thing to this point. But it does feel like, just from reading this and the little bit I've read elsewhere, it does feel like maybe Alan Snyder has found a way to take what Alan Moore did with the Swamp Thing and make something of it that feels fresh. So this issue does excite me for my further exploration of the Swamp Thing. So in that sense, it's a good 0 issue. But as a story, it's totally incomplete. I think that's another thing about a lot of these, and maybe the Phantom Stranger will turn out to be the same way. For a lot of these are like little pieces of a puzzle. So maybe when you've read 20 issues, the pieces will fall all together if the writers have done their jobs well and stay on the book that long. An exception to that actually is Animal Man. This is his origin story, and it's told very well. And the only flaw of this would be a great jumping on point, I think. Or great for people who've just started reading Animal Man with Rot World. It gives a sense of his character, and it does tell the beginning of his career, and it ties it in, unbeknownst to him, but we know what's really going on, and ties in with the current Animal Man very nicely. For those of us who've been reading it all along, it's a book that we don't need to read, because it just is expanding on what we've been told in the regular Animal Man stories was the truth behind his origin. But we just didn't get it all fleshed out in a nice comic book. So I enjoyed reading this, but it didn't add anything. So if you're following Animal Man, you could skip this. If you want to jump on to Animal Man, this is great. If you're an Animal Man completist, it's very nice. I am warming more and more to the art of Steve Pugh. Steve Pugh. I don't know how to P-U-G-H. I don't know how to pronounce his name. It was, I think it was a little hard to transition from Travel Foreman, if you really got into his art, to this. This is a little more standard art, but there's something a little quirky about it that really works for me. And in a way, I think I like it better than Travel Foreman in the long run. It ties it a little bit closer to the world of superheroes, maybe. So yeah, Worth picking up, but certainly not necessary to pick up unless you're just jumping on an Animal Man. And here, this was my favorite of the Zero issues. Earth 2 has been excellent. It's kind of sad that it wasn't drawn by Nicola Scott, but probably a good rest for her so she can catch up and continue to do great work on Earth 2. Cross my fingers. But actually pretty nice art by an artist who I've never heard of before, Tomás Giorello. I'm guessing by the accent on his name that he is not American. So probably one of many European or Latin American artists who are quite brilliant. This epitomizes the story that is really just some piece of the larger tapestry, that we still don't see the full larger tapestry. It's really the story of this guy here called Agent 8, or he's the guy who would have been Mr. Terrific. Darn, I thought I knew his name. I thought I knew what he was called. So, anyhow, he's the guy who we saw, I think in issue 2, take out Mr. Terrific from our universe, or capture him. And I've been waiting to learn more about him and what was going on, and so now I know a lot more. He's kind of like, almost like the Lex Luthor of this world, I'd say, the super genius who believes he's working for the good of the world. Only the difference is here for a while he was working with the superheroes and considered a superhero, and then he did this big betrayal that he thinks is for the good of the world. So I thought this was quite cool. As you can see, there's lots of big panels, and sometimes I'm not a fan of that, but it really, the big, huge panels work for this big sort of apocalyptic scenes that we're getting of the last days of the superheroes, the last days of Earth 2. And one thing we learned that I thought was very striking is exactly how much damage Earth 2 has experienced. I think in the comic book continuity of Earth 2, I think it's 5 years after a big war with Apocalypse. But as we learn more about all the devastation, this is a very different Earth from ours, or from the DC standard Earth. It must be devastated and with millions and millions, if not billions, of people dead. So it was very intense. Where this will fit into the puzzle of everything else remains to be seen. It kind of changes my feeling about the first issue. I feel like now I want to go back and read the other 4 issues of Earth 2. So if you're into Earth 2, I think this is a must. But as I said, it's like a piece of a puzzle, a piece of the tapestry, and it remains to be seen where it fits. This is not at all a good jumping on issue. But I think they're still reprinting Earth 2 #1. I think they still have new printings of it because it's been so popular coming out. So you can probably get all the Earth 2s at your comic book store, at a good comic book store, or online. So yeah, that was the best of them. I also got some comics that were not DC, and I'll be putting up a video about those in a day or 2. Talk to you all later, and get out there and review some comic books for me.